So when we started it in 2016, the idea was to just put on a conference because I felt like there was stuff going on in Australia and South Africa and in Sweden, and that we were probably responsible for this crisis with the McGovern Commission and all of that, and Ansel Keys and everything. And like I felt like here in the States we should be doing something to try and help right the wrongs as well, and maybe having a conference to help get that message out to people would be a way that we could do it. And my idea was just to have, hopefully, an annual conference in San Diego. But I had so many people approach me afterwards and say, you need to come to the East Coast, you need to come here and there. And what's happened is that now we've got this conference, we've got one, we're going to Jakarta in April, into Tasmania and Australia. We come back and we're in Seattle in May, and then we're back in San Diego again in July. So suddenly we've got a whole bunch of conferences. But the most important thing I really became aware of was the fact that we needed to help build a community. People need to have, especially in this environment where everybody is so anti this diet, and it's although more and more people are talking about keto now, but people get ostracized and they get attacked by their families and their doctors and everything, and they need a place to feel that they're safe. And so we started to be more than just a conference and try and start building the community. And just by the way, last year I kind of told my own personal story about how I got into this and why. I don't want to waste time with that this time. It's on YouTube now. If you're that interested, you can go and listen to it there. But so I want to talk about this morning, in the little bit of time that I've got, about what we're doing with this community and where we're going and why we're doing this, because I think that's a lot more important than my story. So the first thing that we wanted to do, what did I do? Did I break something? Try again? Okay. Right, so the first thing I wanted to do was, I mentioned doctors, and the fact is that almost every doctor that you go to, if you go and tell them you want to do keto because you've heard online or from your friends or something about these amazing results that they've had, you go to your doctor and you tell them about it and they say, no, you're going to die, absolutely don't do that. And to find a doctor that is open to this conversation is really difficult. So we've started to create a database now that we've probably got about 500 doctors in there now. And we've got a separate one for dietitians and nutritionists that are also open to this keto conversation. And we keep growing on that. At the moment, there's just a way to search on zip code to find someone near you. Someone suggested the other day that we actually have another search option for speciality. So if you're looking for a particular kind of doctor, you might only find one in the next state, but you prepare to make that trip because it's for that speciality, you know. And hopefully one day someone in your city will put their information in as this database grows. So that was the first thing, and you'll see that little certified badge there. I'll come back to that a bit later. So we added that, and then what we did was that we wanted to be able to make the science behind all of this available to everybody as well. So we started creating a database of all the papers and clinical trials and stuff like that we felt were really good and relevant. And then Nina Teicholz and Sarah Hallberg made up a list of papers that they submitted for the dietary guidelines. They're reviewing the dietary guidelines, and they were calling for submissions from people. And they actually made a document, about 100 papers or something, in an Excel document. And so what I did was I took that and I went through all those papers and I searched to find a lot of them where I could find the full text. And so we've created a database of all of those papers plus a whole lot more, where you can actually, if we've been able to find the full text, and you see the full text, otherwise you at least get a link to the abstract, and you can track the paper down yourself. So that's all freely available, and we continue to build on that. There's a list of articles there as well, where we find people that write really good articles. It's not a paper, but it's a really well-written and really relevant article, then we'll add that in there as well. And I put her up here because she's an absolute rock star. But Adele came. Gary Taubes asked if we could do an event in July, this past July in San Diego, where we got clinicians and practitioners that were trying to implement this in their practice. How get them to come up and talk about the problems they were having, the successes that they were having. It's got a lot to do with Gary's next book. So he suggested that we get Adele to moderate the conversation. So I contacted her, and instead of just saying, yeah, okay, I'll come and do this, she sent me this document about all these ideas that she had in her head, and it freaked me out. It really did. But it was because it was so big. What she was thinking of was so big, and it was about trying to change the standard of care and establish a standard of care for the therapeutic, what is it? The carbohydrate restriction as a therapeutic intervention. And after being completely overwhelmed and getting over it for a while, I started to think about it. And right in the beginning of her document, what happened was that she was on a jury in a malpractice suit. And the judge had to explain to everybody, and especially the jury, what standard of care meant. And it's actually quite intriguing. And I'm not sure, yeah, you can basically see it. So the standard of care is not a document. Standard of care is not documented anywhere. And she says there, it's not clinical guidelines, it's not what doctors, physicians, practitioners are taught in college. It's about what a community of practitioners in a particular environment with similar training, what they actually do. And it's intangible almost. And you ask doctors, and you say, what's the standard of care for this? And they'll tell you, but they won't be able to tell you how they know that. It just is. And that just comes from conversation. And so I started to think, well, there's a couple of things that jumped out at me from that definition. And I started to realize, you know what, I've actually got some of the building blocks here. And Adele was offering to help with the guidelines. And so I suddenly thought, okay, you know what, we can actually do this. And so the first thing was that, yes, it's not the standard of care, but a clinical guidelines document is really important. So what we did was we put a panel together. I started writing to people. Okay, so first of all, I wrote a blog post about this, what we're calling a standard of care initiative. And I keep updating that blog as more stuff happens and more stuff transpires. We keep updating that. So it's a good place to keep up there with what we're actually doing on that front. But what we did was that I started writing to some of the big names in this community and saying, look, if I want to do this, are you prepared to help me? Because I'm not a physician. I can herd the cats, as Adele puts it, but I can't write the clinical guidelines document. So Adele is actually penning the thing. She's actually writing it. And then we are referring to all of these people on our panel to go through it and make comments and get it to a point where it's a publishable document. And it's not only those. I mean, she's talking to Asim Malhotra and Dave Unwin and all sorts of people, Karen Zinn, all around the world, to keep all contributing to this document. And it's on the current draft is on our website. And it's still a draft. We're hoping to have the official 1.0 released by the time we have our event in Seattle in May. But this document is pretty far down the line, and just as it stands, I think it would be something very, very useful to a lot of practitioners. So we're already making it public, but just with a proviso that it is a draft right now. Not really any corrections that are going to happen to it, but maybe some more additions. So it's an awesome document, and Adele has, I cannot tell you how much work she's put into this. It's frightening. So that was the first part, was we needed a guidelines document. And then the rest of it was kind of on me. And that was the community part and the training, because those were the two things. It was a community of doctors with similar training. So what I did was that I started to put a platform in place, a social platform where we could really show this community, and we could have these conversations, and they would all be captured and all searchable, so that over time we'll have something to point to that shows the consensus within this community. And it literally a couple of weeks ago has finally all come together. You can, you get your free membership onto our site, and that automatically gets you into this platform. And then what we added to that was the professional communities. So we've now created actual professional organizations for medical practitioners, for dietitians, and even now for the fitness crowd. And what happens is that once you join that community, you then have access to special private forums that are only available to that community. And once we get into there, and especially we get these people that are on our panels and that to start putting in statements, talking about successes, and then people can get in there and ask questions, and that is how we eventually have something that we can point to that says that is the consensus for people that are talking about carbohydrate restriction, because it's completely different to the carb eaters. I think that's my favorite thing. Whenever Eric Westman is, and he'll be here to speak later in the weekend, and you'll see if you watch any of the panel discussions we've had in that, and people come up and they ask him questions, and he says, or make statements and try and get him to clarify something. He says, "That's for carb eaters." And what you have to realize is that everything is so different if you don't eat carbs. Your whole metabolism is different. Ketosis is a shift in your metabolism. So you cannot apply the same criteria to someone who eats carbs and someone who doesn't. And that is so important. And so standard of care is very different if you don't eat carbs. And that's what doesn't exist right now. And that's what we are trying to establish. And it's hard. It's going to be hard. All I've done is started to put the building blocks in place here. But that's all I can do. Now I need the community to actually start participating in this and actually have those conversations and ask those questions. And if you have an answer to a question, answer the question. Because that is the only way that we are going to establish this. And so this is just an example. For those of you that are listening on the live stream, that's one of the groups if you go. So within this social platform, you can go in there, you can create your own groups, you can have discussions. It's kind of similar to Facebook, but the whole thing is that it's all captured within our platform, and it's like a database, and it's searchable and all that kind of stuff, and it doesn't just disappear off the bottom of the page like it does in Twitter or Facebook or something. And that's because some people have asked me, why not just use Facebook? And that's the reason. First of all, there's just so much going on, and everything is just so spread out. And the other thing is that we don't want things to just disappear off the bottom of the page. We want to be able to capture this, maintain it in a database, and have something that we can point to. And if somebody ends up in court, we can say, this is why they did what they did. And everybody else here agrees. And look at all the successes. And we need that. At the moment, we don't have that. Someone here now ends up, any physician that's recommending low carb or carbohydrate reduction or whatever is putting their neck out, you know? And we need to get to a place where they're not at risk. And that's what we're trying to help them with. So for those of you that are on the live stream, if we go to that special West Palm Beach group, that is where you'll be able to type in your questions and stuff during the Q&A. And I'll jump in here and there if somebody has a question online that we can ask the speaker. And this is the group for the medical practitioners. If you join the professional organization or the professional group, then you'll have access to this group. And this is where these conversations are going to happen. And this is what will eventually establish the standard of care for carbohydrate restriction. And then the other part of it was training. Because I mentioned earlier that we have this database of doctors, and anybody can come and put their name in and say, hey, I'm a low-carb friendly doctor. But you know, I know some of them, but I don't know all of you. And what's important is that we are sure that the people that we certify we know that they've at least been exposed to training that we know is good. So we've kind of joined forces with the Noakes Foundation. They have a spin-off called the Nutrition Network, and they've created an online course exactly for this, for training physicians and medical practitioners in the concepts of carbohydrate restriction. And that's a dynamic thing that's growing and growing and growing. And if somebody completes that course, then we know that then we can certify that they know what they're talking about. Okay? And pardon? The access to that training is on the website, so yes. And then, so we go back to the list of practitioners, and Carl's sitting right here. You've done that course, right? And so he's got the certified badge next to his name. So when somebody's looking for a doctor through that list, if they've got that certified badge next to them, they know that we've at least verified that this person has done some training and that they know what they're talking about. Dr. Brett Scher he's not here yet, but he's going to be here as well. He's on our panel, and he's one of our friendly cardiologists. He's one of the guys that's going to tell you that you're not going to die of a heart attack if you do LCHF. And he's also doing a lot of podcasts and stuff for the Diet Doctor. So he's a pretty awesome guy. And so I suppose finally the main thing is, why am I doing this? Why are we doing this? And we try to help Nina Teicholz and Sarah Hallberg and all those people on the Nutrition Coalition who are fighting day and night in Washington, D.C. to try to help get the guidelines changed. But it started in 1977. It's 41 years. It took us 41 years to do the damage that we've done so far. But there's so much money. Big Pharma and the sugar industry, there is so much resistance to try and change it back again that I fear that it's going to be a lot more than 40 years before we ever change those guidelines back to something that reflects what it really should reflect. And I said in San Francisco, we cannot afford to wait for those guidelines to change before medicine changes. I feel, and that's why we're doing this, is so I feel like changes in medicine should lead the changes in the guidelines. That eventually they're going to sit up in Washington and say, well, nobody's doing this anymore. We might as well write the guidelines to reflect what everybody's doing, because we cannot wait for 60, 100 years for all of this, for people to finally get it, that everything we did there was so wrong and how many people we've killed in the process. Seriously, it's terrifying, actually. And so Ryan Lowry's not here yet. He normally speaks with a good friend of ours, Dr. Jacob Wilson. And Ryan's speaking on his own this year, but he's probably going to be a bit pissed off with me about this because I'm stealing their line. But they always finish off their talks by saying, if not us, then who? Who's going to do this? And if not now, then when?